So we want to talk about the Stanley Cup and what it has meant to all of us. Chris, I'll start with you since you're to my right. From a business perspective, Chris, and I know the Blues have been so popular since day one. There have been some lean times through a few ownership changes, but since Tom took over the team, about 10 years ago, it has been building and building. But what in particular did winning the Cup do for the St. Louis Blues?
Well, I think the first thing it does, whether you're and I'll use some of the other teams, the long-suffering teams, the Red Sox in baseball, the Cubs when they broke through. Many of you have grown up with this team. Many of you have been fans forever. A team that in our 52, 53 years, we have been to the playoffs the second most of any team in the league over that time period. All of that creates two things. One, it creates expectation, and then it creates disappointment. Because you've given so much as fans, and yet it's like, okay, how are they going to let me down this next time? And I think what you saw at the parade, what you've seen in this summer, is this emotional breakthrough. And it's I can't quantify it. I can't tell you what that magic is, but winning the Cup, I do believe, has changed hockey in St. Louis forever.
No question about it. Dan O'Neill, of course, we know the name. His dad, a longtime writer for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. So, Dan, you've been around sports your entire life. I'm sure you've gone to many events as a kid with your dad, to baseball games, hockey games. Was it better, Dan, than you thought it would be once the horn sounded at TD Garden?
Yeah. I'm kind of like Z in a way. As we were going through the playoffs, and maybe like all of you, there was just a part of you that felt like, what's going to happen? What's going to go wrong? What is it going to be this year? What really kind of flipped the switch for me was Schwartz's goal in Winnipeg. That was different. And every subsequent round, sort of something like that happened. Bishop getting his head taken off in round 2, and then just the way that Carlson answered the question about the hand pass after round 3, I just thought, and the way our guys responded to it, I just thought, something's different. And then I think, Gunnarsson's goal in overtime, game 2, that was to me was like, now we've broken the ice. Now we can play. We finally won a game in the Cup final. Now we can play. So that was, it was kind of a roller coaster, but I felt like every single round we had something that just made you feel like it was different.
Yeah, a pivotal moment in every series. Chris Pinkert, as the director of digital content, you are there literally every day at practice, on the planes, at every game. So you had a big hand in the History Made book. Tell us about the genesis of the book and your thoughts on the book now that it's come out.
Yeah, well, the Blues worked with Fleshman Hillard. They had a team gathered over there to help put this championship book together, and we wanted to put out something that people would pick up 30 years from now and look at and still see all the photos and the memories and all that. So one of the cool things for me in the whole process was, I think all of us do. We look at Bobby Plager as sort of the walking history book of our team, right? If we need to know about a player from 1968, Bobby can tell us everything about him. If we need to know about something that happened in 1984, Bobby can tell us all about it. But what was amazing for me in putting the book together was, since I was around for I think every minute, every practice, every game, every road game of our championship season, I was around. So when all these photos would come together, we'd be sitting over at Fleshman, and they'd say to us, like, what is this a picture of? And what was cool for me is I realized I was someone that could answer that, having been there the whole time. So there's a photo early in the book where you see Doug Armstrong holding a cell phone. And I think it's on one of the opening pages. And I remember, we're writing captions for all these photos. And Jim Woodcock over at Fleshman said, what am I looking at here? And the answer was that Army holding the phone right there was when Ryan O'Reilly called him for the first time to say, let's go win a cup. And so for me, it was really unique to know that every single picture in that book, I could tell you what you were looking at. And so the way I look at Bobby Plager for the whole history of our team, that dawned on me that like Dan, Trevor, who's shooting video over here, like our group is around every day doing content, and we almost are the sort of living encyclopedias of the Blues Stanley Cup championship season. So that was a cool realization for me.
Scott Robach, we mentioned you're the team photographer. You also are the team photographer for the St. Louis Cardinals. So you've covered World Series, you've covered now a Stanley Cup championship. Any similarities, any differences? I know the sports are different, but what's it like for you from behind the lens to cover a World Series and a Stanley Cup?
That's one of the things I thought of leading up to the Cup was the experience of World Series and even Super Bowls with the Rams, traveling and shooting those. There was nothing like it. The Stanley Cup, the celebration, the parade, everything was hands down, just blew away everything else. That was one of the coolest parts, is seeing, especially the players, as we mentioned before, about getting off the trucks, running around with the crowd, spraying beer and champagne, to the fans, letting them touch the cup. There's nothing like that I've ever seen before, even covering, for like USA Today, even covering other World Series in other towns. This celebration was by far the best I've ever seen. It was the most exciting. And then also being a part, traveling for the Stanley Cup, just seeing all the ins and outs, like Chris mentioned, when you're there every day of that part of it, to experience that and then to see it at the end, it just was something truly special.
All right, Randy Gersh, we mentioned that you had a big hand in planning the parade and the ring ceremony. The parade itself, so I guess the obvious question is, when do you first start planning a Stanley Cup parade?
Well, that was definitely the tricky part. It was actually right after the Western Conference Finals, right after we clinched. There was a small group. Obviously, you have to keep it pretty private. You don't want the word out that you're planning a championship parade before the series even started, and then even before it's over. But yeah, we started right away with the small group. Obviously, the police department, who was a huge help with us. 0 arrests during the parade, so that says a lot about our fans in the city of St. Louis. Making sure everybody was safe, working with a couple people at the Arch Grounds, as well as the Veiled Prophets, who helped organize the parade route.
Randy, the broadcasters were toward the front of the parade, and then we went to the stage for the big ceremony under the arch, and we had to wait for close to an hour. Now, I know that wasn't planned, and the players got off the floats, so what was your reaction when they started to do that? And in a way, isn't that what made the parade so great?
Well, to answer the second part of your question, yes, that absolutely made the best part of the parade. And like Scott said earlier, and it's my opinion too, the best parade. We set the precedent for parades moving forward in all sports. And just the way that the players experienced winning the championship with everybody that supported them throughout the year from last place to first. But as somebody who plans events, we like to make sure that you kind of hit timelines. And you never really hit them on events, but an hour is actually very generous, John, so thank you. It's probably closer to 2.5 hours that it took them. But I was pretty far back in the parade, and I got out of one of the vehicles, and I started walking up. I go, what is going on? And I'm like, why is this taking forever? We weren't moving. I was pretty close to where Pat Maroon was. So to even get around the first corner near Union Station, I'm like, this is unbelievable. And he gets out. I figure it's just him being the hometown guy. But what our players did, you look down the road, they're all out of the trucks. And they're all high-fiving every fan. They're running back to their buddy who's supposed to be 10 cars behind and bringing them forward. They're now taking the mini bikes and riding them up and down the road. So there was a lot that, as somebody who plans events and you like to kind of keep to a script, that we didn't keep, but once you see it and the smiles and the experiences, wouldn't want it any other way.
I think the thing that's interesting about the players and the parade is how much that meant to them to be able to share it with all of our fans. And that day, I assure you, none of the people who planned the event gave them any direction. That was them doing what felt right to be doing. And I think it's an exceptional statement about our players.
Real quick, we did give him direction to stay in the truck.
Didn't listen. Not having. All right, Randy, you also had a hand in the ring ceremony, and it was a very exclusive event. I was fortunate enough to be there. It was incredible. What was the goal, aside from giving the ring, of course, to make that night so special for the players, the coaches, and the staff?
Well, the goal was to just keep it, one, as classy and simple as possible, and then two, to find a venue that really kind of told the story of what we just accomplished. And to do it at the Missouri History Museum, what a better backdrop than that, just telling the story of the history. We just created history. History made is the new slogan. It really, I remember bringing it to Chris and saying, what if we do this here? And right away, absolutely, let's figure out how to make it work. And to be able to plan that, and one thing that isn't really told is nobody in our organization's ever won a Stanley Cup on the business side before this year. So we basically had our own blank canvas and had to figure stuff out on our own, and to be able to be a part of that and to do that and to be creative with it, with the support of everybody around here, was pretty amazing.
Dan O'Neill, from a media perspective, and again, you're in charge of media content, so you're there, Dan's there every day with the players, arranging interviews, dealing with the media. Can you give the folks an idea and perspective of what it was like to go from Game 82 to the first round against Winnipeg, and we know Canadian cities are crazy about hockey for good reason, then to the second round, the Maroon Goal, the third round, and the final, which is a whole different animal. But from a media perspective, give us a perspective of what it was like from your angle.
Well, it was a little unique. Typically, when the regular season, you know, when the big market teams come in, Montreal, Toronto, New York, the media ramps up double, let's say. When the playoffs started, it kind of roller coastered. So Winnipeg comes in the first round, and they've got a huge contingent, one of the biggest in the league. Then Dallas comes in, and Dallas has got one of the smaller. They don't have a lot of media covering their team regularly. And then San Jose gets bigger due to national attention. Now you get all the national writers flying in to focus on one series, but none of that compared to the final. So just logistically speaking, our press box has just over 60 seats in it, which we get by with in the regular season. We usually don't have to add more, rarely. So for the first round, we had to have 75. For the second round, we had to have 125. For the third round, we had to add 150. And for the final, we had to have 250. So we had media sitting in the crowd. We had nowhere else to put them. All across the top of the bowl there, where you see like kind of the penthouse suites, almost all of that was media seating. And then we had to build risers behind our typical press box seats to house all the media, because here comes Finland, Sweden, China. We prepared for it as best we could, but once we saw everybody come in, I've been to all-star games and stuff like that, and then there's a lot of media there. It doesn't compare. It really doesn't.
What about Game 7 in particular, Dan? What were you told? I know the league has a big hand in interviews and things like that post-game, but from your perspective, you know, Game 7 leading up to it, and then the ceremony itself after we won.
As far as Game 7 went, we were really lucky in that the league is on hand, obviously, for the finals, and they have their entire office there, essentially, helping out. So the way it worked after Game 7 was they said to us, you know, if you guys win, there's a process where, you know, the cup was going to come out and Petra was going to grab it, and then they were going to do the Conn Smythe, and there was just a whole kind of a process there. And then they were going to open the Zamboni gate, and all the media was coming onto the ice, because that's how many of them there were. I couldn't do it anywhere else. It had to be on the ice. And so they said, after we get through the team picture, after you help us just with a couple guys for the rights holders, and you get the Conn Smythe winner and that whole thing, forget about it. The league will handle the rest of it. So we were able to kind of celebrate with the guys after the game on the ice and in the locker room, because the league had probably 30 representatives there to help poll guys for interviews after Game 7.
Yeah, quite a night indeed. Chris Pinkert, again, as Director of Digital Content, not only are you there every day, but you had the pleasure of going to 8 Cup days with the players. So can you briefly tell us where you went and maybe a highlight or two from one of those days?
Yeah, if I'll have to think about it, but my first trip after we won and started the Cup tour, we went to Craig Berube, then went to Colton Parayko's. You saw probably the toast his grandma and stuff like that. Then it was to Saskatoon for Braden Shen, to Regina for Tyler Bozak and Jaden Schwartz, and then I came home after that for 2-3 days, and then immediately went back up to Toronto, where we went with Jordan Binnington, Vince Dunn, and Alex Pietrangelo. So they were all different. They never got old. One of the cool things was, since we're with the team every day, the players we came with cameras, video cameras, still cameras, phones, obviously for social media coverage. And one of the cool things was, since we're with the team every day, they never really treated us like outsiders or media. They, brought us right into their party buses, or we got to go to every event with them, and in their houses, where they grew up with their families. And so that whole experience was unreal.
Scott, were you at a lot of the Cup parties?
Yeah, a few of them. And that's the one thing is whether it's a player, coach, staff member, would hand the cup or hold it for their parents. And that's where a lot of the emotions hit. And it was pretty cool to see. There was a couple that I remember that, it's just really, really neat to see the parents' reaction. And then their son or daughter just reacting also made it really special.